Hey, all right, good afternoon. It is noontime here in the great state of Texas. I'm super excited for today's guest. About 85% of the population at one level or another suffers from something called imposter syndrome. And, our guest today specializes in that. She's got over 21 years of experience in that field, is specifically helping C-level members of organizations. I'm excited to have her on today. She's an expert, and we're going to learn some stuff about imposter syndrome. Coming up next on the Phone. All right. Very exciting. Our guest today, excitedly enough, is from really way across the pond. It's like dinner time where she is, so I'm super excited to have her here today. Real quickly, Tara is an imposter syndrome specialist. She's the creator of a one-on-one coaching program called Inner Success that eliminates imposter syndrome in just 8 weeks, which is amazing. She has a diploma in holistic therapy, coaching certification, neurofeedback training accreditation. She has a neurofeedback training accreditation as a PhD in engineering. So extremely smart. As I said earlier, she's got about 21 years of experience helping high achievers excel. And her Inner Success program basically is actually based on hard science, and it combines neuroscience, psychology, physiology, trauma therapy, and high performance success methods. And her Inner Success program is not only practical, but it's also repeatable, tried, and tested. Her first book, Unmasking: The Coach's Guide to Imposter Syndrome, was an Amazon #1 bestseller in 2018, and she is in the midst of putting together an app that people can go ahead and get access to her and her amazing strategies and techniques that is forthcoming. Tara Halliday, thanks for joining us today. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me here. This is
so
really great.
Yeah, this is exciting. I have people from Canada on here, but you're the first person from across the pond. I'm excited. Well, listen, good evening to you. So let's get right after it. Imposter syndrome. Is it what it sounds like, and how do we define it?
Yeah, so imposter syndrome is secretly feeling like a fraud when you're not.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not actually being an imposter.
Mm-hmm.
It's when you are competent and capable, and you know that, but internally you're not feeling quite good enough.
Right.
It affects, as you said earlier, up to 82% of high achievers at some point in their careers, and it causes confusion, isolation, anxiety, overwhelm, and stress, and can lead to burnout and people just quitting their careers.
So some of those symptoms are anxiety, isolation, you said, kind of cordoning themselves off from people. Are some of these symptoms outwardly noticeable?
It's very hard to spot someone with imposter syndrome, right? Because they are successful, they are doing their job well. Everyone thinks they look great, they're doing great, and they just don't know this internal strife that's going on inside of them. And they don't know that they're waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, beating themselves up because of a mistake they've made, things like that.
What are some of the coping strategies these people use to kind of deal with it until they meet you?
There's a whole bunch of behaviors that people will do to try and get away from that painful feeling, awkward feeling of feeling not good enough. So they'll be procrastinating, they'll be perfectionist, and they'll be comparing themselves to others incessantly. They'll keep it all a secret, as we mentioned. They might hide their opinion so that people won't find them out to be a fraud. They might refuse promotions or refuse to take on new roles because they're worried they're not qualified enough, even though they've got plenty of qualifications. And they would be over preparing, so they'd spend a lot more time preparing something than the project would actually need. So so that's why it's so exhausting and so stressful, and they're constantly in fear that someone's going to come and tap them on the shoulder and say, we made a mistake hiring you. You've got to go. And that's the biggest fear.
So two things. Number one, does that at some point become a self-fulfilling prophecy for them, that they're so focused on being found out to be an imposter that they eventually do things and say things and put themselves in a position where people feel like they actually aren't the person they said they were when they came to work at the company or to be in charge of the organization?
No, it tends to go internally, and they'll suffer from burnout, and they might quit their job. That
So,
would.
Gotcha. Okay. So interesting. So the people who have sales car reluctance suffer from many of the same challenges, right? Lack of self-esteem, lack of self-worth, lack of self-belief is a big thing for those folks. Lots of perfectionists, people who are getting ready to get ready, and whatnot. But the difference is the people who suffer from sales car reluctance, they don't usually take action. They usually engage in procrastination and other avoidance strategies. They're usually self-saboteurs. They're either this complete mental block that keeps them from doing anything. Sometimes they experience very physical responses like sweating, upset stomach, nervousness, anxiety, panic, or even like feeling lightheaded.
Yeah.
Sounds like, so I want to know how people who suffer from some of the same symptoms are able to actually perform to get to the point where they can do well enough to be a CEO. Because if you engage in avoidance and other strategies like that, historically you're not going to do the things that are going to get you where you need to be seen at a higher level, to be a leader within an organization. So I'm intrigued at how those folks are able to overcome those challenges to get themselves in a position of leadership.
They don't actually overcome it, so they have the same physiological response, because that's the nervous system saying, hey, there's a danger, there's a tiger in the room, we should respond, fight, flight, or freeze. So they have that same result, the same internal response, but they just push through it all, right? And so they're successful despite their imposter syndrome. So this is why. And if you ask them logically, are you capable? Are you competent? They'll say absolutely yes. They know that they're capable and competent, and they have some confidence that comes with that. But it's just internally they have this self-doubt, and the gap between how others perceive them and how they perceive themselves internally is what is imposter syndrome.
Gotcha. So what caused you to devote almost a quarter of a century into understanding this challenge and then helping people overcome it? What was the genesis of that for you?
So it was, I guess, a journey of continuous improvement. So I started as a holistic therapist, helping anyone with anything stressful. And then I noticed that some people didn't just start feel better and go away. Some people kept coming back, and that's not the point. The point is to empower people to go off and do their own great stuff. And so I looked into why, and it narrowed it down to beliefs. So I did a whole bunch more research, and I came across this coaching methodology all about our worth. Our worth being unconditional versus conditional, right? Our worth depending on what we do, which is conditional. And
I'm sorry.
That's okay. And so I trained in that, and then one of my clients brought imposter syndrome to me, and I started researching that as well. It was fairly new to me, and it was just so blindingly obvious that what I was dealing with, an unconditional worth, was exactly the problem with imposter syndrome. So that then whole bunch load of research later, interviews, writing the book, working with clients, and then after that, another wave of research looking into neuroscience and how the brain works and how the beliefs are formed in the first place. So it's been quite a journey. That's allowed me to condense that program down into a very laser focused 8-week program.
Gotcha. That's amazing. That's great. I have a feeling that if we took your brain and put it in my head, or my brain in your head, it would just roll around. I'm saying, like, my head would not be able to hold your brain. It's amazing. It's all the information you have in there. So what is the genesis? What is the cause of imposter syndrome? Where does it originate?
The very root cause is the belief that our worth is conditional, that our worth depends on what we do. And if you look at where we got that belief from in the first place, that actually comes from a normal part of human development. So when a baby's born and up to about 18 months old, their brain is building this model of the world. But until they're 18 months old, they have no idea of themselves as a separate entity. Everything's blurred together. So what they do and who they are is the same. And so that's the first model that the brain has. When they develop that sense of self between 18 months and 3 years, then unless somebody explicitly teaches them that their worth does not depend on what they do, then that model just carries forward. And that's what 99.99% of people have as a default model in their brain, because no one taught them differently. So it's not come from any trauma or poor parenting or anything like that. It's just a little tweak to our belief system that we didn't get. And the good news is the brain has plasticity, neuroplasticity, so we can repattern that. We can actually change that belief.
Right. So from the research I've done, when I've done, I found that for some people, and maybe this doesn't play into what it does for you, but what I've learned is for the folks that I've been working with is that in some cases, people's lack of self-worth does come from bad parenting and what parents do say to them, and from trauma and stuff like that. So, what I love about what you hear though is that a lot of people aren't told what their worth is, and that they're valued and loved, and that they don't need anybody else to help them feel worthy, that they're approved by themselves, they're accepted by themselves, and they don't need any of that from anybody else, that you're good enough just as you are. So 100%, I didn't know, do you work with people who have been in situations where their parents definitely were not nice, where they beat them, or they've experienced trauma, and as a result of that created what I call hidden identities, hidden beliefs about themselves, that they are truly not good enough and that they are not worthy and not deserving?
That's exactly it. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, there's a whole spectrum of different childhood experiences, because we have that initial belief that our worth is conditional. Then what happens is every time there's something that confirms that, so there's the belief, and then there's this layer that gets on top. Okay, here's something confirming, and the brain has this confirmation bias. It likes to confirm the model, right? Because our brain's model of the world is the most precious thing it has. It's how we navigate the world, by trying to predict the future. And so anything that confirms the existing model gets kind of slapped on top. So you've got these layers and layers of experience, and they can be deeply traumatic experiences ranging to PTSD, or they can be, fairly mild, like a twitch of the eyebrow and a slight disapproval from a parent, but it goes straight to that belief about our worth. And the reason that is so powerful is because when we're a baby, because it's going back to that time, when we're a baby, we are so completely dependent on our parents, on being cared for, that if we didn't have their approval, their care, then we would die. So that's why this wave of, the nervous system response that you're seeing, the stress response, comes up, because the brain's interpreting that sense of conditional worth as being dangerous, a threat to life. And that's why it's so powerful.
It's fascinating that happens within 36 months. I mean, you would think that it's, so much more after that. So what I hear you talking about the dangerous life is that, we're born with a negativity bias as well, correct? To protect ourselves. Like, a lot of people call it the reticular activator, right? But I mean, at the end of the day, we're animals. And so all animals are given a sense of way to protect themselves from danger, right? So that kind of plays a part of it, right? Because so we're wired to look for negative things, right? To look for things that could be considered dangerous or hurtful to us. And so it would seem to me that also plays a part in it as well, correct? In an effort to protect ourselves and to accentuate maybe the negative or accentuate the bad, so that we can somehow protect ourselves, so that view of the world protects us. Does that kind of play into it as well?
That's exactly it. So there are two parts to the brain. One is the amygdala, which people call the fear center of the brain. This is where we have this filter of, all the information that comes in, and it filters, is this dangerous or is this not? And if it is dangerous, then it's called amygdala hijack. It hijacks the front of the brain, the thinking, strategic planning part of the brain, and we have this nervous system response, this fight, flight, and freeze. The reticular activating system is our brain paying attention to what's important to us. And that can be negativity, that can be things that are threatening, but it can also be things like, food or a mate, going into, very, very primal. They're both very primal parts of the brain, but yeah.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
I'm fascinated by the human brain. It sounds like you've done a tremendous amount of research on it. So I love that. it's interesting because you talk about nervous system, sympathetic nervous system, right? Fight or flight. For me, the people who have sales call reluctance, including myself, I had sales call reluctance for 10 years, and I had a lot of trauma when I was a child. I had a pretty rough childhood, and so I kind of defined it as fight or flight. And the people who suffer from call reluctance they're flighters. They turn into a puddle. They avoid confrontation. They avoid anything that would put them in any position where they could feel pain again. It sounds like the people who have imposter syndrome are fighters, meaning they may experience the same thing, but they're like, I'm gonna keep pushing forward even though I feel what I feel, right? So they're like, I may have the same trauma, I may have the same fear, but I'm not gonna let that fear hurt me. But I'm gonna keep fighting and moving forward because otherwise, if they were on the flight side, they wouldn't do what they needed to do to put themselves in a position of leadership, to put themselves in a position where they could grow and be the head of an organization. Would you say that's a safe assumption?
I would say actually the tendency to fight or flight or freeze is pretty well evenly distributed.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's more that it doesn't completely freeze them. Right, because there's the freeze response. It doesn't stop them. So but it does mean that they're pushing really, really hard, like they're fighting themselves the whole time. So it's a massively stressful experience.
It's exhausting.
It's absolutely exhausting, and that's why burnout. That's why people quit their career. Yeah.
Oh, it ruins a lot of relationships too, huh?
Yes, it does.
I can imagine. Yeah. Wow.
Mm.
Fascinating. I could talk after we're done here. Can we sit and talk a little bit longer?
Yeah.
So let's talk about why it's not a confidence problem and why it's really like a deeply rooted challenge that people are. They're almost it's happening from an emotional, almost like an emotional level. I mean, maybe even a limbic level, right? Does your limb system play a part in this at all? Is it emotional or like
it starts in the brain. It starts with the amygdala in the fear center. And then it gets triggered, right? When there's perception of danger, it gets triggered into fight or flight or freeze. Yeah.
So obviously, I find that the biggest leverage that a lot of people have is they're literally like, they're at the bottom. They've hit rock bottom. They can't either. They want to put a gun in their mouth, or their life is so painful that they can't think of living another day like that. How do people get to the point where they're finding you to say, hey, please, save me? Like, because it's, as like you said earlier, I mean, they deal with it. We cope with it, and we create coping mechanisms. And, I've kind of learned from somebody I worked with before who was helping me with something. He said, we get used to our own dysfunction.
Yeah.
We make adjustments and we continue. We live with our own dysfunction and whatnot just to move through. So how does somebody get to the point where they're like, God, I gotta, there's something wrong here. I don't know what it is, but I got to fix it. How do they get to that point? And how do they find you? I mean, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's usually a matter of time. So what's happening with imposter syndrome, like you suggested, it's not a confidence issue. It's not low self-esteem. So these people will be completely confident and successful in other areas of life, but there'll be a small trigger or one individual thing that will trigger the imposter syndrome thing. So for some, it might be doing a presentation, right? It might be speaking in public. For others, it might be leading a team, or it might be having a financial discussion publicly, or so there tends to be smaller things that set them off. People come to me when they've seen that pattern over and over, right? So the challenge goes up, and then the challenge goes down. So it kind of seems to go away, but it comes back as a repeating pattern. So when people are in their 20s, they tend to think it's a one-off experience. When they get to the 30s, they think, well, if they just push through it, it'll go away. By the time they get to their 40s and 50s, and they're at the senior levels, it's like, this isn't going away, and they're seeing the cost that they're paying. Financially. I mean, to quit your job financially, is a big deal. To not go for a promotion, you're going to lose financially. To not win particular contracts, also financial. And then, like you say, there's the relationship aspect, or they're getting burnt out, or they have been burnt out. And sometimes they've had very difficult experiences, like they've had a bullying situation at work, and that's kind of knocked their confidence as well. So it could be anything like that. But the average age for my clients is 44.
And probably for myself, it took until I was about 50 or 51 to deal with the issues I had, some of which, are imposter syndrome like. And it's hard to explain to people that nothing's going to change until they take in control of making the change itself. You can go to bed, you can pray, you can read books all day long. What book can I read here? What video can I watch here? And it's not an external, it's not an externally driven solution. You have to go in and get inside and start working on the root of the problem and whatnot, and so it's hard to say to people, nothing's going to change until you make the change, until you take hold of it. And there's not a book you can read, there's not a video you can watch, there's not a talk you can go to that's going to be like, the magic wand, the panacea to solve the problem,
That's exactly it. If there was, it wouldn't be such a problem.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And you'd have it in a pill and you'd be selling it on the side of the road. So, so let's talk about solutions. Well, since we just kind of talked about that, let's talk about some solutions.
Yeah. So the solution is this changing the belief that underlies it. You can address the symptoms, like you can address the flight, and freeze response, right? If you have that, you can do some physiological things. You can shake out your hands. You can do some deep breathing and all of this kind of stuff. That will give you like temporary relief, and maybe you'll go on to the next step. But things like mindset changes, affirmations, neuro-linguistic programming, psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is, imposter syndrome is considered normal functioning. And so psychotherapy is not, it's a normal response to a false belief. Yeah. And so, it's a very deeply uncomfortable situation, but it's not considered a dysfunction. And so people try all things like that, and hypnotherapy and all sorts of things like that. But the real solution to get rid of it for good is to change the belief. And you need a very specific process to actually change that belief.
Where does meditation and mindfulness come into what they're doing as far as helping them with building the muscles in their brain to be able to deal with those emotions when they come up? Do you involve people in that at all?
So there's a 3-step process to get rid of imposter syndrome. First, you've got to calm the nervous system, calm the behaviors, calm the triggers. Then because the brain is then calm, you're able to change the belief, which takes a particular process. And then once that belief is removed, so it's a subtraction, it's taken out of your model of the world, then you've got space to bring more presence to it. And so you can do things like meditation, and those are useful after it. Mindfulness. At the start, it's self-awareness rather than mindfulness, which is slightly different.
100%. Yeah.
And then after you've got rid of it, then all these good things of, positive mindset and everything will all work, because you'll be able to have new beliefs come in that are positive and supportive, because you've taken out the one that blocked it. If you don't take out the one that's blocking it, then you've got this constant fight between the two, and your existing model will win that fight.
Yeah, it's amazing that you say that, because I've been coaching real estate agents for about 20 years myself, and I would sit down with them and say, okay, let's plan goals for next year. Like, what do you want? Like, what do you want to dream? What are your dreams? What are your desires? And some people just couldn't get it out of their head. And it took me forever to realize that, because they were focused so much on the problems they were having and the challenges they were having, and like you said, their view of the world was so negative and distorted that there was no room for them, or they couldn't just give themselves the permission or believe that they were even worth the fact that they could have something in their head and dream about it actually happening, and I'm sure you've had this too, but I had a client recently say, listen, I'm starting to think about things that I thought about 20 years ago that I stopped thinking about. So I'm guessing you see a lot of the same thing with people, right?
That's exactly right. When people are in a lot of pain, which is often how they get to decide they're going to do something about it, then they're just focused on pain relief. So this, whole blue sky thinking, what's your ideal, all this doesn't even resonate, because they just want to just going to stop the pain. And then once they've had that relief, then they can look at, oh yes, we the horizon opens up. It's literally when your when your brain and your nervous system is in the fight, flight, and freeze states, your vision actually narrows. It becomes your physical vision narrows, because it comes, you're looking for where the danger is, right? You're paying
Right.
attention.
Mm-hmm.
So you lose that peripheral vision, and the same thing happens in terms of, your brain and your thinking. You can't think laterally, you can't think expansively, because your brain is focused so much on let's stop this pain.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the most exciting things about it, you said earlier, was the neuroelasticity, and how basically our brains are so flexible that we can go ahead and create new belief systems and literally rid ourselves of the old belief systems. And clearly in 8 weeks, a lot faster than you might think possible. So, I mean, that's exciting. How would you best explain that to somebody, the neuroelasticity and kind of, what that means and looks like?
So the neuroplasticity is just, so we have our model of the world, which includes the things we actively think about, and a whole in our conscious mind, and like an iceberg, most of it's underwater, a whole level of unconscious beliefs, and these are what drive a lot of our behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And when we change those beliefs, when we with the neuroplasticity, so the beliefs are always being updated, right? Because because humans are flexible, like they're incredibly responsive to the environment. They can adapt
Right.
in phenomenal ways.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because we've got a way of updating our beliefs. However, if we've got a belief that contradicts what the new belief coming in, then it's not good. Then they've got that fight going on. So the neuroplasticity is just our ability to continually adapt and learn new information and respond to it on an unconscious level.
And it's interesting is that's, it's not just, doing affirmations, it's also making space for those new beliefs as well, right? You can't just come up and say, I love myself, I love myself, I love myself. You got to go and find out what that contrary belief is and say, okay, we need to just kind of make some room so that good stuff can get in there. And then kind of like, watering, it's like planting a seed and watering it, soon it takes over and it becomes the new belief system. So
that's
so
exactly it.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why, what kind of engineering degree did you get?
Mechanical engineering. I did computational fluid dynamics.
Oh my God, that sounds utterly horrible. I'm a left brainer myself, so that's all right brain stuff. How do you go from engineering to, because really this is all what obviously you're talking about a lot of technical stuff, but clearly there's lots of emotions involved in what you're doing. It's not all numbers and things like that. How do you gravitate from getting a PhD, and I don't even know what you just said, in engineering, and to the point where you're dealing with people, at a very emotional, very personal level? How do you get there?
Yeah, well, it's kind of, how did I get to engineering is more the question, because
Okay.
when I was younger, before I went to university, I wanted to be a psychologist. My family wouldn't let me because that wasn't an approved of route for me.
Really?
Yeah, there wasn't enough money in it, apparently. I need to get a, so I know.
Listen, as long as you're not paying my bills, what do you care what I do, right? I'll feed myself.
Parents,
Obviously,
right?
your parents must be immensely proud of you, because not only what you've done, but you've changed people's lives every day. There's nothing more rewarding than that. So that's incredible. So, tell us real quickly about this imposter syndrome quiz, if you would, please.
Yeah. So
yep. Mm-hmm.
So it's a 20-question quiz, and it's basically to see, to what extent you're experiencing imposter syndrome, whether it's, a serious issue for you constantly, or it's infrequently. And it's 20 questions. This is actually the original research quiz that was put together back in 1978 when imposter syndrome was first identified. So it's a bit of a classic, and then people can get a report that I've written that explains a little bit of those results to them.
Awesome.
Yeah,
this is awesome. I love this. I'm saying I can talk about this stuff all day. I'm excited because some of the stuff you've talked about today, I can weave into what I do too. So that's incredible. Anything else you want to share with folks before we wrap things up here?
Yeah, so I think probably a tip, right? That's probably going to be something that'd be useful for people, particularly, I think, people who start comparing themselves to other people, which is, well, just about everyone, right?
What is it called? The thief, self-esteem thief, right? The thief of happiness and good self-esteem is comparison, right?
Exactly. So it's a very classic and very common imposter syndrome behavior. And so, people say, well, just stop comparing, but the brain doesn't work like that. The brain's always like measuring things up, again, looking out for danger, looking out to try and predict the world. So if you find yourself comparing yourself to someone else and making, what you're doing, your brain, as you say, with the negativity, is looking for the differences. Right? So if you catch yourself comparing and looking for the differences between you and somebody else, just flip it around and start looking for the similarities. How am I the same as that person? Right? How, what experiences or skills or whatever it is do we have in common? And the more you do that, the more that your brain is going to say, oh yeah, I belong here. Yeah, they're the same as me. It's going to relax your nervous system. And it doesn't fix low self-esteem. It doesn't fix imposter syndrome, but it's a very good tool.
Yeah, it gives a little bit of relief too. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Where you can get some space.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Relief,
I really, really enjoyed this. This was amazing, and you're incredible, amazing information. Very gracious. I wish you good luck with everything that you do. I loved having you here today. Thank you so much.
It's been great. Thanks so much, Wally.
Thank you so much. All right, folks, that's Sarah Halliday. I'm Wally Bressler. This has been On the Phone. Hey there, this is Wally Bressler, and on behalf of my guest today, I'd like to thank you for joining us for this episode of On the Phone. If you'd like more information on how to overcome sales call reluctance, procrastination, and self-sabotage, and become an expert on the phone, go to www.phonesalessecrets.com. And if you'd like my free course on how to overcome sales call reluctance, please go to www.phonesalessecrets.com.